Good evening. Hi, I'm Dr. Elise Carter-Vosen, Director of the Oric-Alburn Interreligious Forum here at the College of St. Scholastica, where I also teach in the Department of Global Cultural and Language Studies. The Interreligious Forum promotes respect, understanding, and peace among the diverse religious and cultural communities of our region through sustained cross-cultural dialogue, shared study, collaborative projects, and events, and we are honored to have worked with so many college and community organizations to bring you tonight's speaker, who opens our culturally and spiritually responsive healthcare conference. I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement, inspired by the examples of ACO, UMD, and with insights from colleagues in our Native Studies Center at St. Scholastica. We're here today on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe. We reside on lands ceded in the 1854 treaty. We recognize and support the sovereignty of Native nations in this territory and beyond. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm the continued vibrancy of the community and the powerful example set forth by the Fond du Lac Band through the highly respected Minnow Ayawan Clinic and Mishkawazin Treatment Center. This model of integrative medicine, healing, and wholeness has been present in Indigenous communities and communities of color since they came into being. It's our hope that this conference can play a small part in honoring these forms of knowledge and in drawing attention to the critical role of attending to cultural and spiritual values must necessarily play in healing individuals, families, communities, and our planet in the years ahead. Minnesota has unfortunately carried the mantle of having some of the greatest disparities in education, housing, and health during the past decade. And in our own city of Duluth, we know that life expectancies can vary among neighborhoods by as many as 11 years. We're grateful at this conference on culturally and spiritually responsive healthcare to have support from many organizations in our community which are strongly invested in making structural changes needed to achieve equity and deepen respect for difference, even if the road is long and winding. This conference would not exist but for the work of many of you in this room who have devoted large portions of your careers to opening up conversations about making full health and healing possible for all people in what is still an inequitable world. We would like to thank all of our major sponsors for their generous support: the Anishinaabe Fund of the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation, the St. Scholastica Department of Social Work, the HRSA grant, CSS Native Studies Center, Bragelman Center for Catholic Studies, and Essentia Health, as well as our supporting sponsors, the Minnesota Organization of Registered Nurses, St. Luke's Foundation, CHUM, St. Scholastica Health Humanities, and Sustainability in the Environment programs, and the CSS Schools of Nursing, Health Science, and Arts and Letters, as well as the CSS Office of Diversity and Inclusion. So on your way in today, you received 2 items and then another one as you were sitting. The most recent one should be an evaluation form for this evening's presentation. We would deeply appreciate your feedback as we want to know its impact on you and as we consider programming for the future. If you need a pen, there are additional ones out on the registration table. And if you would leave it on the registration table or with an usher, that would be wonderful on your way out. And you also received a postcard that includes information about tomorrow night's presentation by Sam Grant, who is director of the Sustainability Program at HECUA, co-founder of Afro-Eco, the North Minneapolis Sustainable Food Lab, Embody Deep Democracy, and the Grassroots Public Policy Institute. Sam's talk tomorrow night is entitled Reawakening Our Deep Ecological Wisdom Traditions for Community Health in the 21st Century. And it takes place at 6 o'clock here in the Mitchell Auditorium with a reception beginning at 5:30. Looking ahead, I would also like to mention the next presentation in our Allworth Peace and Justice Lecture Studies coming up on Tuesday, November 5th. The talk is Transforming Crime and Punishment, given by William Kelly, Professor of Sociology and Director of the Center for Criminology and Criminal Justice Research at the University of Texas at Austin. And then on Thursday, November 14th, a talk entitled Hard Lessons from the Catholic Abuse Scandal, Theological Consequences for a Church in Crisis, is a talk by Dr. Massimo Fagioli, professor of theology and religious studies at Villanova University and writer for Commonweal magazine. Both of these talks on the 5th and the 14th are at 7:30 p.m. here in the Mitchell Auditorium. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I would like to note that this screen on stage, on the screen, we're displaying the text of tonight's lecture through a technology called real-time captioning. Although we anticipate a high-quality format, there inevitably will be errors that are inherent to the technology. Nevertheless, we believe that many people may benefit from captioning, including those with hearing loss. A special thank you to the Edwin H. Eddy Foundation, whose generous support make this inclusive service possible. Tonight, we are deeply honored to have with us a visionary leader in our state with a powerful voice for cultural inclusiveness and community health. In 2012, Maria Regan Gonzalez began her first job in local government, working for the city of Richfield in the area of public health. She says that she quickly fell in love with Richfield and moved there with her family. She notes that Richfield is home to the second largest Tibetan community in the state, a strong Latino community, and many immigrant and refugee families. She said she liked that she could see diversity while walking the streets with a public school student body that is 72% students of color. As a Richfield City Council member, Regan Gonzalez became a strong leader dedicated to building a more prosperous, community-oriented city. She championed projects aimed at increasing equity, sustainability, and accessibility for residents. These initiatives included a tenant protection ordinance, removal of barriers to hiring diverse police officers, increasing the age of tobacco sales, and pursuing a dementia-friendly city designation. Elected in 2018 as the first Latina mayor in Minnesota history, Regan Gonzalez pursued public office because she wanted to be a catalyst in diversifying political leadership in a state suffering from some of the highest racial inequities in the country. By integrating her political leadership, cultural identity, and spirituality, Regan Gonzalez prioritizes social connectedness, public health, and inclusive decision-making, envisioning her city as a laboratory for a more inclusive government amidst widening disparities across the state and country. Regan Gonzalez also acts as a change agent within the healthcare system. As a community health strategist at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota, she focuses on health equity with a goal to improve the effectiveness of our healthcare systems for all Minnesotans. Dr. David Erickson recently noted that health happens in neighborhoods. Mayor Regan Gonzalez's work certainly embraces this philosophy as she uses her passion and talent to bring people from different backgrounds together to make change. Please join me in warmly welcoming Mayor Maria Regan Gonzalez.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. It's such an honor to be here with you all tonight, and I want to say thank you to St. Scholastica, and thank you to all the sponsors and everybody who is here tonight, and everyone who's helped make this possible and for hosting this forum. I really think we are so fortunate to just have this space and the time that we have tonight and tomorrow to build community with one another, to learn, to make connections, and to get inspired, and most importantly, to grow our leadership as it pertains to providing more culturally and spiritually appropriate health care for everyone in our state. So I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about, and I was going through the sessions, and you guys have such an amazing opportunity tomorrow to really listen to the experts from across Minnesota who are doing this work, the community members who are leading, and the people who are really innovating in this field. So I didn't want to dive deep into strategies and different examples that people are doing, because I feel like that's what tomorrow is going to be about, listening to what other communities are doing, getting ideas, and talking to folks who are doing the work. What I wanted to do was really talk about the big macro, big picture, and why this work is so important, why this work is necessary, and how our identities, how our culture, how our histories, and how the work we do all connects, and how spirituality is a part of that. And that if we really want to transform our healthcare system, we must do nothing short of a complete transformation of ourselves first, and make sure that when we're going through that process of self-transformation and growth, that we're reflecting our learnings and that we're putting that into practice in the work that we do as healthcare providers, as community members, as leaders, and as parents. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. And how many of you have been watching the presidential debates? Okay, I can kind of see it. Looks like a lot of you maybe. So we know that healthcare is a huge topic, and every presidential debate, it is a huge topic, and for everyone in this country, healthcare is a huge topic. But what I want to make sure, and again, this goes back to the root of the topic tonight. This is not about the technical and logistical aspects of the healthcare system. This is more about the theory and the connection and the role that we each play in our healthcare system. So if we are not mindful and intentional about dismantling the racism, the classism, and all of the other forms of discrimination embedded in our healthcare system, these forms of oppression will continue. Regardless of any direction that our country goes in, regardless of if we choose Medicaid for all or if we choose another healthcare system, we will just be transferring all of those systems of oppression from one format to another format. So that is the work that I'm talking about tonight. We need to really have a much stronger analysis of how race, class, and oppression of our communities plays into the healthcare system and the role that we each have in perpetuating that as individuals. So tonight, I want to talk about the radical internal and external transformations that we must go through to build a world that is kind and that is just, and understand that these transformations are what we need to connect to building healthier communities and transforming our broken system today. So before I dive into that, I want to share a little bit about who I am and why I lead, because I'm up here saying that, it's really important for us to connect our identities, our values, who we are as individuals, with our leadership and the work we do. And in order to model that, I want to share a little bit about who I am and how I came to this position in the work that I do. So I am very proudly a biracial Chicana. I'm one of two children. I grew up here in Wisconsin in the Midwest. My mother is an immigrant from Mexico City, from Ciudad Neza, which happens to be one of the most impoverished, most dangerous and violent communities, neighborhoods in Mexico City. Narcotraficantes control my family's neighborhood, and it's a very unsafe community. So that's where my family is from, and that's where they continue to live today. And my father, he comes from humble beginnings on a dairy farm in Mora, Minnesota. He was the first kid in his family to not go to the country school. He went to the new built school in the city. And his great-grandparents were immigrants from Ireland and Sweden. So I was the first in my family to go to college. And like many people, at a very young age, I had to start acting as an adult because the chaos and the adults around me, unfortunately, weren't always able to serve as adults and to protect us young children. So at a very young age, I had to make adult decisions and lead as an adult and go through, traumatic things. But that's the case for a lot of our community members. That's the case for a lot of us, and that shapes who I am today. And that's why I'm sharing that, because the childhoods that we have, the families that we come from, inform the way we lead, the way we act, and the way we practice and do what we do today. And understanding what that looks like for yourself is very important. And starting from a place of understanding who you are in your family history and how that informs your work today is also very important. So growing up, I grew up in the space between privilege and having identities of being disenfranchised. I understood that my family in Mexico did not, and even today still doesn't necessarily always have money for food. The water comes and goes, so they have a holding tank for water when there's weeks and months where they don't have water, access to water. And knowing that a part of my identity was rooted in all of that. And growing up in this country, growing up a US citizen, growing up middle class, I had access to education. I grew up playing ice hockey. I went to my family's cabin on Mille Lacs Lake, and I just had a completely different reality than my cousins just because of where I was born. So from a very young age, I grew up feeling that reality, feeling that tension, and also feeling that, you know, in neither space I necessarily belonged. I always felt a little bit different. People looked at me differently than their peers, whether I was in Mexico or whether I was here in this country. Again, something that you'll see is really important to the rest of the story that I'm going to share with you later. So when I had the opportunity to go to college, I was the first person in my family to go to college. And I dedicated my education to figuring out, learning more about my cultural roots, but also I pursued an education that was focused on trade policy between US and Mexico. So, you know, of course, again, connection to that identity and what I decided to pursue with my education. So I got my degree in international trade and policy, and I worked for years in Mexico and Ecuador, working with indigenous farmers on sustainable and traditional farming practices. And what I realized, and actually I just asked myself the question, why am I over here in another country, in Mexico and in Ecuador, working with farmers who know exactly what the solutions are that they need, who know what is best for their families, and I'm over here coming from a different community, a different country. That dynamic just didn't feel right. And I also realized that the farmers that were living in the deep poverty that they were living in was because of the trade policies of this country, because we have put structural adjustment policies in place so that Ecuador would be in debt to our country and to use the US dollar. And the fact that the trade policies of this country were exporting goods at lower than it cost to produce in other countries, putting thousands and millions of families into poverty. So I realized that what I needed to do was to come back to my home country, the United States, and to make change from within this country and change our policies. So after going through this journey, it brought so much clarity to my priorities and how I wanted to move forward. And I also became more clear about the role of my identity and the role that played in building courageous leadership. So something that I once struggled with as a youth, the story that I told you that I never felt like I was from either, you know, the Mexican culture and community, from half of my family, or feeling disconnected here as well, feeling like I didn't fit somebody's box exactly or the expectations of others. It now became my passion and my purpose, and it's the reason that I live today, and it is my strongest asset. And what I realized is that I am a natural bridge builder, that I bring together people from different cultures, from different communities, different walks of life, to come and sit at the decision-making table together to find solutions that are best for our community. And that's what I do as mayor. That's what I do at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota. And it is because of my identity, how I grew up, and who I am, and what my values are, that I do the work that I'm doing today. And that identity and that realization was one of the main reasons that I decided to run for office in 2016. So I didn't come from politics, partisan politics at all. I had voted, I had donated to candidates that I liked, but that was all. That was my engagement and involvement in the political process. I came from a place where I felt like each party, both parties, would use my community and other communities during campaign season, but when it came time to actually make radical changes that we needed, like hey, why not give a driver's license to everyone in the state of Minnesota so that they can get their children to school and to their activities, or things that would help my community? At the end of the day, those policies weren't passed. So I was really not interested in doing anything more than voting. But I saw so many things happen in the healthcare system in my community, the Latino community. I saw young African-American men being shot by police officers, and I was protesting in the streets with my husband, and we came back one night, and I just said, I can't do this anymore. I need to do something different, because how many more marches do I have to go to until this gun violence stops? How many more things, opportunities for volunteering do I have to do before my community has access to healthcare? And I just felt like what I was doing wasn't adequate, and that I radically had to change my life to lead and to actually make change in my community. So I also worked for the city in our public health department, and I saw how many resources big institutions and big systems have. And luckily, the city of Richfield, and this isn't the case for all systems and institutions, but the city did acknowledge that we have a beautiful, growing, diverse community in our city, and that they wanted to reach out to those community members that are refugees, new immigrants, folks of color, but they just didn't know how. But they acknowledged it, and they knew they had to do a better job. And when I was out in community, I learned from families that they wanted to be a part of our community. They wanted to be involved in sports and recreation services. They wanted to be involved in programming, but they didn't know how. They didn't know what the process was, and in many situations it was very different from what they were used to. So there was that disconnect. And I realized, again, with this identity that I have of being a bridge builder, that I had something to offer, that with my public health background, with my community organizing background, with my ability to bring people together, we could have leadership that could help co-create the future of our city with everyone at the table, focused on building a healthy, thriving community where people felt safe, where people felt included, where they could walk around, where they had good jobs, where they had quality, affordable housing, and that if we took a people-first approach and we focused on the health and building a healthy city, that was something that was possible and tangible. And when I decided to run, of course, there was many voices that told me that I wasn't ready, that I didn't look like a political candidate or a politician, that I needed to wait in line, that there was somebody else that was prepared to be in that position and that was more capable than I am. And I had constantly these messages around me telling me not to run and putting barriers in place. And I decided that I was going to continue anyways, and that I was going to run for office. And you know what? Maybe I had never run a campaign before, and I didn't know the political piece of it, but I knew that I had skills to offer. I know public health. I work in public policy. I worked for the city that I wanted to help govern, and I knew my neighbors in my community, and that there was a lot of things that I could contribute that were missing. So we decided to run, and we had a very scrappy grassroots campaign that really engaged so many people that were not typically engaged in voting, in civic engagement in general. We had teams of Latino youth, of senior citizens, of community members with disabilities, of Tibetan youth come together sharing the story of our campaign in the community. And when the election night happened, we were able to win with 58% of the vote when everybody told us that we didn't have a chance. And so that was absolutely an amazing night. And shortly after, I had the opportunity to run for mayor. And again, I knew that there was a lot of change that we could do and that we had just began our work. And since then, Dr. Carter talked about some of the things we've been able to do. We've been able to make changes that are public health changes, improving the lives and the health of our community members, including increasing the age of tobacco sales to our youth to 21. We've been working on complete streets initiatives and safe routes to school, where we're ensuring that every single time We do updates of our infrastructure. We make sure they're walkable and bikeable and safe for our drivers, creating an infrastructure that's healthier and safer for all of our community members. We've reduced bureaucratic barriers to hiring and retaining officers of color in our city. We got rid of our Police Civil Service Commission because we did a study and we found that that was creating so many barriers to community trust and to retaining officers that looked like our community. We've done housing studies on the connection between affordable housing and health outcomes, and we unfortunately found that Richfield has some of the worst racial inequities in home ownership rates in Minnesota. So when we found that, we made sweeping changes. We changed classes and partnerships in the community to make sure that we were supporting our residents in finding ways to build their credit up and to address the biggest barriers to home ownership. Today, if you're a Richfield renter and you want to buy your first home in your middle income to lower income, there's a few parameters around it, requirements. We will give you $15,000 down payment assistance for your first home, 0% interest and 100% forgivable, because we want to support our residents to have housing stability and home ownership in our community. So I'm telling you all of these things and all of this story because I want you to see the connection, and I want you to think about what this means for yourself. What is the connection of who you are, how you grew up, what your family history is, what your passions are, what your identity is, to the work you're doing today and who you are today? And make that connection to health and make that connection to your spirituality. And the piece that where spirituality comes into play for me, and this can look different for everyone, as a young Latina woman of color running for public office, it is very, very vulnerable to put your face, your name, and who you are to the public, out into the public. There's a lot of pushback, and like I said, this happens and continues today. People questioning my leadership, questioning my authority. When I decided to run, people telling me that I wasn't fit or ready to run. And so for me as a young woman of color, I need to dig very, very, very deep and find that spiritual depth and connection to be bold and to not internalize those negative messages that come at me externally on a day-to-day basis, and to find strength in myself and to find the connection to the greater good and the reason that I'm here on earth, so that I have that strength and that power to move forward. So I'm asking you all today to think about what is that story for yourself, and how do you connect who you are and your identity to what you're doing today, and where does your spirituality come into play? Because at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is build a world that's more inclusive, a world that's more compassionate, a world that's more welcoming. And we can perpetuate systems of inequity that bring us further and further away from that, or we can dig deep, find those connections and find those values, and take steps and actions and say words that will get us closer to that reality. And part of the work, I want to share a little bit about what this work looks like at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota. And I also wanted to say I'm going to end in a little bit, and I would just be open to having answering questions and having a discussion back and forth with you all tonight. So I do this work of building healthy communities in partnership with community as mayor, but I also do it at Blue Cross and Blue Shield. So are there any public health folks in the room tonight at all? Any folks from public health? Okay, so there's a few. So we know as public health professionals and healthcare professionals as well that 80% of what actually creates health is outside of our genes and is outside of the traditional healthcare system. It's socioeconomic factors, it's our built environment, it's our behaviors. So 80% of what creates health and impacts health is outside of healthcare. And these are all the things that I was talking about earlier. Our streets, the zip code that we live in, the color of our skin, our educational attainment. Do we have access to healthy food? Do we have access to affordable housing? These are the things that create health. So as we know, our healthcare system is not set up to address those issues. So part of the work that I do, again, is using my ability as a bridge builder and identity as a bridge builder to work with our community members to figure out how can Blue Cross Blue Shield, a health plan, Minnesota's largest health plan, do better at incorporating social determinants of health into our core business strategies. So we're looking at how do we address social needs in clinics and hospitals? How do we make sure that we are supporting community health workers and building out the pipeline of community health workers and ensuring that they have actual reimbursement rates that cover the work that they're doing and that are sustainable? How do we work with community partners such as food shelves, such as economic development centers, when community members come into our clinics and our hospitals and say they have social needs that cannot be addressed within the hospital, that we are giving them a warm handoff to community partners that can help them grow and thrive for the long term. So this is a little bit about how I use my leadership and use this identity and connection between healthcare, health, and leadership at Blue Cross. So again, these are just questions that I want to put out, but how are each one of you in your role looking at those social determinants of health and what your role is in addressing those? Understanding that maybe if you're a physician or a certain type of provider, you're not going to have the answers. But in order to change our system, we need to be leading collectively. So who are those community partners and those folks that you're working with in your profession to make sure that we're all moving towards addressing those social needs and making sure that social determinants of health have less of an impact on our community members. So lastly, I just want to reiterate the point that if we want to make these sweeping changes of our healthcare system to be more culturally appropriate, more inclusive, and more equitable, it's extremely important that we go through those changes with ourselves and with our families. And that requires a process of internal reflection, questioning things and asking why are things set up the way that they're set up, and doing the work we need to do to shed generations of colonization that have succeeded in limiting our beliefs and our actions, contributing to the systems that we have in place today. So I'm not necessarily here to say we need to completely dismantle every system that we have in place, but that as a part of folks that have commitment and passion to providing health and well-being for our community, it's important that we start questioning and getting different perspectives and figuring out how we can do better for our community. And understanding that every single decision we make and action we take is either an opportunity to move us towards advancing equity or towards perpetuating inequities. And that's why that self-reflection and getting to know who we are is really important. I have seen in my profession and my work a lot of community members and leaders of color who have internalized the oppression that they face on a day-to-day basis, to the point where we feel, and this happens to women also, where we feel that we're not good enough, we're not adequate, we don't have the skills, we're not ready yet, because that's what we're told. I've also seen many well-intentioned white community members who want to do good, who want to do the work of justice, but because there's not self-awareness of their privilege and of their role, there's more harm done than good. So this is the piece of understanding who we are, where we come from, where those spaces of privilege are that we hold, and where we may be disenfranchised, and how we can learn and lead collectively with one another. So I think those are the main things that I wanted to share tonight. But the biggest thing is that I want to ask everyone to just take time to reflect And this is such a great space. You have so many mentors, so many community members, and this forum is the perfect space to do this. And just think about, for yourself, what does the connection between who you are look like with what you're doing today? Think about your values. Think about the things that you're most afraid of, and start to explore that, and start to know yourself better, and then start pushing yourself past your limits and past what you think is possible, because if we seriously want to change the reality of the world we have today, we absolutely have to transform ourselves, and we have to step outside of our comfort and outside of our fear and figure out how we're going to take action today to change that, and figure out in every single role that we have what that looks like, so that we can have a more just and equitable and inclusive healthcare system. So thank you very much for having me tonight. So I don't know if there's any questions or what you're like.
I just extend a particular invitation.
Yep.
So one of the things we really try to do here at St. Scholastica, whenever we have a guest coming to give us, share their knowledge, is really encourage students to come up first, if at all possible. And I meant to extend that invitation beforehand so you could be thinking about it. But I'd really like to encourage you, even if you're feeling a little shy or uncertain, to come and ask a question. And if nobody comes up, I can always bring the microphone around too. One other thing I just wanted to mention to anyone in the room who's holding a copy of the schedule for tomorrow is that you can get on the website and register tonight or first thing tomorrow morning and attend any session. Any student here can come for free, any faculty or staff member. And if you have any questions, just let me know. So. If you just Google Culturally and Spiritually Responsive Healthcare Conference, you'll find it. So I just want to invite people to come up.
Thanks. Hello.
Thank you for being here. I just kind of want to ask you, I'm Kim, by the way.
Hi. Sounds like everyone knows you.
Yeah, I'm an OT student. I just want to ask you kind of how you've addressed the challenges of being a biracial woman, and how that's how those challenges of you've overcome those and shaped your identity, because I've identified with what you're saying, and I just kind of want to know your point of view, and it's amazing what you've done today. So
thanks.
Just your story on that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. So in terms of the challenges of being biracial, so when I was a kid, I grew up and I went to a Catholic school, and my brother and I were the only family of color, the only students of color, and my mom would make us the most amazing, delicious Mexican food, and then I would take it to school and super excited to eat it, and all the kids would be like, ew, gross, what is that? That looks like poop, and all the things that kids say, right? Except it was delicious mole and all this amazing stuff. And so quickly, I was like, you know what, Mom? I don't want your food anymore. I want you to make me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with the edges cut off and a Jell-O cup and little carrots. That's what I want. And the kids put these notes in their lunch that says, I love you from your parents, so that too. And even in school, I got to the point where I would say, please don't call me Maria in public, call me Mackenzie. My middle name is Mackenzie. And it was just really sad, because I was really, I didn't want to accept that part of my identity, even though that part of my identity was very much about my home and my family. It was really difficult. And I'm very much, my identity is very much like white passing. And so when I was a child, I think people were not very threatened by me. Maybe I was more ambiguous and I could be anything to them, and it was friendly to them, but my brother, does not look like he has a white father at all. And the discrimination he experienced was much, much worse than what I experienced, and it still is today. So we pushed back as children, I think, and it wasn't until college that I started to explore my Mexican identity. And there's a lot of books, even if you're not Mexican, Chicana, biracial, there's a lot of work on Chicano identity, which is great to read if you are biracial or multiracial, and it talks a lot about those mixed identities. And when I was a kid, I didn't feel like I was a part of my Mexican family or my American family completely, but to be honest, I got to a point where I knew myself enough where I said, you know what, I am who I am, and I speak Spanish very well, but it definitely doesn't sound like the Spanish of my Mexican cousins, and that's okay, and my brother doesn't speak Spanish at all, and we're no less Latino than anybody else. So today, I've gotten to a place in my life where it doesn't matter about the expectations that others put on me, because I know who I am, and I'm very strong in that, and I will never compromise that. And that's why I am where I would never be mayor. I would never have my college degree. I would never have done anything if I listened to the expectations of others. And I think being biracial and multiracial and multicultural is my biggest asset that I use today. So again, that's just one of the reasons, whether you're multiracial or whatever your background is, it's so important to know who you are and to accept that and to love it and to be very strong in it. Because I think you can never go wrong by doing that. But it was a journey. When I was a kid, it was much more difficult. So, other questions? Great.
I guess just kind of wondering what kind of resources us as students and as future health professionals can use to help advocate for our patients and make that change in policy happen.
So I'm wondering, what are the backgrounds of a lot of the students here tonight, like educational backgrounds? What are folks studying? Okay, so it's very much like healthcare setting. Okay. So I think learning, maybe if you're able to take a class on public health and public policy, that'd be great, just so you can learn, public health is very much about scaling what you all are doing to the population level, and figuring out how you set up systems and interventions that impact the health of huge populations. I think with the curriculum that you will have in healthcare and in public health, you also need to have another perspective and learn about, I would say, the history of race and racism in this country and how this country was built on that and continues to be built on that, because that plays into our day-to-day. That plays into the statistics and the studies you read in class. That plays into the patients that you see, and understanding that big global context is really important, because a lot of folks who are trained and work in healthcare, it's very much about the individual. A lot of times it's very focused on a specialization, and all of that is important and necessary and needed, and it functions within a much global, systemic, institutional context. And so looking at things like, like I said, our history, looking at public health, looking at how public policies are made. Even if you go to a local city council meeting, I'm sure there would be a teacher here or somebody that could take the initiative, or a student, when a health topic comes into play, even when it's transportation, when it's housing, these are all health issues, and go and take a field trip to your local city council meeting. Go and look at, listen to a work study session and learn how your local policies are created, and maybe weigh in on a comprehensive plan or infrastructure plan. So those are some things that I would recommend. Also, if you have any organizations in Duluth that are focused on community organizing, that would be a really good kind of a good discipline or framework to also build. It's about how do you build community power, how do you build community voice, how do you build coalition and collaborative work in a way that's just and puts community first. So those are some resources that I would recommend.
Hi, thank you. And maybe you just answered my question about putting community first being the answer. So I have gone to the council meetings and the school board, and so thank you for the work you do, and it's really contentious, and even in those community organizations it can be contentious. So you use your knowledge in yourself, but perhaps you can give us a little bit more. How do you build that consensus and bring people along in that agreement?
Yeah, so it can be really difficult, and a lot of times I think sometimes you just have to start, and it's a little cliche, but like with a small group of people who are very much willing. So when you look at community change, there's all different types of groups and people, and everyone plays a different role. And a lot of times community organizers, some organizers play the role of agitation. They're there to disrupt the system, they're there to disrupt the status quo, the meeting, whatever it is, and that's their role. And that role is a very important, necessary role. And then we have people who uphold the system and uphold the status quo, and that plays a particular role. And then you have people who are impacted that sometimes don't have a voice. You have all these different people. And what I have found is in order to build effective change, you have to start with people who understand that you need to build community power and institutional power and change as well. And part of my journey was working so much with community and feeling like we had power and a voice amongst ourselves, but then when we got to the table with decision makers, we were tokenized, we were discarded, put to the side, and we actually really didn't have a voice. And realizing that you can build as much community power as you want, but if you're not building an opening and an institution and decision makers that are open and willing and able to work with community, you don't have anything. It doesn't work. And vice versa. You can have a decision maker that says, hey, I'm really open and interested in working with community, but if there's no trust with a community to work with, and if that trust is not there and that partnership is not there with community, you also don't get anywhere. So you have to, I always start with people who know that sweet spot, where we need the people who know what their role is and understand. And sometimes I think about this as diplomacy. You have to be able to work across the spectrum of decision makers and community with the shared goal, and people who understand what that partnership looks like. Some people think that working with decision makers is selling out. Some people think that working with community is caving in. Those folks aren't going to be helpful. You need to find people in the middle that are bridge builders, that are negotiators. And you have to start small, and you have to keep building your work out. So that's a strategy. That I use. And I'll give a concrete example. When I was first employed in the health department, I didn't really know or understand what public health was until I started working in public health. And that was because they were looking for biracial, bicultural, Spanish-speaking public health masters, a person with a master's in public health, to work in the Latino community on community health initiatives. And I didn't have my degree, but I had been working in that for a long time, and I just didn't know it. And I was only one of two people of color in my department who were not translators. And I would get reprimanded all the time by my boss and our health administrator for going out into community and having personal coffee dates with people. And they said, you need to be at your desk doing your job. And I said, I'm doing my job. I'm talking to community, and I'm learning about what the needs are in community. And it wasn't until months and months in that my peer, who is an older white woman who's been working in public health for over 30 years, said, I see what you're trying to do, and I get it. and I see the pushback you're getting, so let's work together. And one day she decided to bring the great idea of going out into community as a team and talking to community to figure out what the health needs were. And we planned this together. And they said, that's great. So immediately after, our whole team was out having one-on-ones with community members and getting to know what the health needs were. And that was completely infuriating to her. She had never seen that before, and it was completely infuriating to me, and I had seen that for a long time, and that was nothing new. But that created a relationship, but she had to be open enough and aware enough to see what was going on. And I had to be open enough and vulnerable enough to trust her and to say that we're gonna do this in partnership. And out of that partnership came so many things, including finding ways to funnel public health money to community members for work that we had not traditionally done ever, but that now is creating amazing health impacts, including a community that led by undocumented Latinas living in apartments in Richfield, a childcare provider network of over 300 Latinas. And that came out of me having the connection with the community, her having the know-how of how to write grants and speak public health speak, working together and getting a seed funding for $2,000 to do free Spanish language, culturally appropriate nutrition and physical activity education for childcare providers taking care of children 0 to 5. And out of that, the popularity grew, the momentum grew, and we've been able to support the community to run the network of themselves, for themselves, and have a whole huge, robust early childhood system focused on providing quality, culturally appropriate care. But that came out of that partnership. And sometimes it just starts with those small people who really understand what it means to be in that middle ground of negotiation and collaboration, and it's hard to find people like that. So, other folks? Hi.
Your first election was to the city council?
Yes, in 2016.
Did you have a specific project goal, and how did you build the? That's a little different, building a coalition among your, you must have had other council members who were supportive or to work with. I'm just interested in hearing a little bit about how you built that, used that philosophy in the city, existing city government structure, and even as mayor too.
Yeah, so what I did is, and again, this is, I think community organizing would be great. If you wanna make wide change for a lot of people, community organizing will teach you about an approach, and you can tailor that approach to what feels right for you. But the strategy that I used today and that I used in 2016 for my election and for all of the public policy changes that we've made since 2016 has been to spend the majority of my time in community. And to spend the majority of my time in community, in the communities where people are not traditionally engaged, seen, invited. So I'm not spending my time at like the groups that are always doing the same work and leading. I'm spending my time in mosques and Latino churches, in Tibetan community centers, in apartment complexes and senior centers where there's a lot of disenfranchised community members, where I can really build connection, build trust, and get to know what their needs are, what their dreams are, their aspirations. And based out of that, we build our public policy platform. And that's where the dementia-friendly city designation came out of, was building relationships with seniors that were really concerned about isolation, that were concerned about being home, wanting to age in their homes and age in place, but not having the resources, and folks that the increasing number of dementia in our city, and figuring out that there's a program and a public health approach that can focus on building a more compassionate community based on supporting our seniors. And so now the seniors in our public health department are leading that work together. When I talk to renters and to low-income communities, job stability, early childhood, and stable housing were issues. So that's where a lot of our work has come out of in those areas. So part of my strategy is to build and expand my base and my leadership and connection, but not with the usual suspects. Those usual suspects are there. I'm already working with them. They're already leading in our community. So it's bringing new people to the table. Then it's building trust amongst your peers, amongst other decision makers. And I've noticed, this was not a part of the plan, but I am the one that does the most homework on all the issues on the council. So that helps because people have noticed that, and they know that you've done your homework. They know you've done the research. And so when you contribute, they know that that comes from a place that's well informed. So that also helps. And then building your relationship with those established leaders, the leaders who are there now, the leaders who have current existing, decision-making power, and finding ways to figure out what the interests of all of those groups are in building trust. It's all trust building and relationship building with the purpose of making your community a better place. There are people and there are politicians, and this is why people don't like politics, that build power in relationships to serve themselves, to build personal power for themselves. That's not going to get you anywhere, and that doesn't get our community anywhere. So it's about building those relationships, building trust over time, and it's depositing small little gestures of trust building with your constituents and with your peers and with other decision makers. And something I'll say, a lot of decision makers don't necessarily have a big base of people. And so if you're a decision maker, if we want, we have a Tobacco 21 meeting and we can mobilize 300 people to attend our city council meeting. That's powerful. And to be able to have that decision-making power and the connection with your peers is important. So building that community network and that support and building relationships is really important. Thanks. Any last questions? Thank you.
I have one that's maybe more of a comment than a question. So I'm Dr. Vinio, and I've been on the Fond du Lac Reservation for 22 years. And I mentor a lot of students that are getting into medical school, that are already in medical school, and students of color primarily. And I had one, just this past week, a student come up to me and say, I have this imposter syndrome, and she's really doing well, and she's smart, and she's going to be great. And, but she has this imposter syndrome. And I had to tell her that I have it too, and I still have it sometimes when I'm a physician. And I still sometimes feel like I really don't deserve to be that physician, that I don't really know how to express that exactly. But what you were talking about with having to dig deep and to push back against all the forces out there that say that you're not good enough to do this, you're not ready to do this. And a lot of students that are going into healthcare, the system is kind of set up and the things are kind of set up to make you think you're the only one that feels like that, and everybody else is doing well around you. Don't feel that way. And any students at least knows how to get a hold of me. I'm willing to talk to anybody about that stuff and to mentor students and to let you know that you can do it, and you can do this. And thank you. And I'm going to use Mayor Gonzalez for an asset of my own, and to talk back and forth. And thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing up the point of mentorship, and thank you for being a mentor to so many young kids. I feel like I have and have had a village of mentors in my life, and I know friends and students and families who do not have a mentor or don't feel like they have a mentor. And honestly, I would say one of the most important foundations of my success in doing what I'm doing is because I've had mentors and people that love me around me that have been telling me when I have that imposter syndrome, and I share it. When I did my first endorsement screening with an organization, Take Action Minnesota, I didn't know what that was. and it's when organizations and groups ask political candidates their positions on different things, and then they decide to endorse, and if you get the endorsement you have, they'll donate to you, they'll give volunteers, and you can use your name and say, this organization, Take Action, has supported me. But I didn't know that, because again, I didn't know what I was doing when I ran for office. And I had a girlfriend there, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't even know what this is, I don't know what they're gonna ask me, what the heck? And she goes, look at me right now. I don't ever want to hear a word like that come out of your mouth again. You are powerful, you're ready, you're able. And I returned the favor to her just a year ago in a job interview she was in. So having mentors is so important. And you know, there's not like a formal way. There's formal mentors and formal programs, but sometimes there's just like not a way to formally get a mentor. And you can just ask an adult or somebody that you admire in life and say, hey, can I have coffee with you? Can I check in with you once in a while and just shop around some questions? And just do that every once in a while, and that relationship will materialize. But mentorship is extremely important, and that's one of the main reasons that I'm here, because I had mentors and people in my life that told me when I wanted to give up, they told me to keep going, and that I was strong and ready. So, anyone else? And I don't know what time it is, so you're going to have to just let me know when we're close to being. Okay, excellent, thanks. Hi.
Hi, I'm an OT student
Yes.
in my first year. And you mentioned talking about situations where people ended up doing more harm than good.
Yeah.
And my guess is that's, has to do with like a white savior mentality and that sort of thing.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering what advice you have for making sure that what you do is actually beneficial and meaningful.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that. So I think the most important approach is to build genuine, authentic relationships with people and communities that you can trust, and ask those most impacted and the people directly impacted before making assumptions, what is the best solution? What do you and your community think, and how can we support you? So a lot of times in public health, I felt like I was trained to tell people what they needed to be healthy. And I think that's an inclination, because we have like an expert mentality, right? We're trained in these professions, but we aren't experts in what people know, in their own solutions and in their own health, and what is best for them. So again, just taking the time to listen and to ask and to not make assumptions, but that also takes genuine relationship building with groups and with people and with communities. And so I think it's just having that practice. So I'll give an example of the Child Care Provider Network. So we started these trainings, and women were super excited, and we had, today we have like 80 people per class every single month who are taking these free child care provider trainings. But at one point, as the public health department, we said, oh, well, let's support the community to be licensed child care providers, because that's quality care, that's going to help them, that will be great. And we started down that path, exploring that, and then we went back to community, and they said, no, we don't want to be licensed. Like, didn't you guys ever think about asking us what we want? They said, first of all, so there's a perception, and it's true also, like, licensed child care centers and daycare centers they're not affordable for so many families. They're not necessarily very culturally appropriate. In our community, our child care providers, our preferred child care providers, are our aunties, our mothers, and our grandmothers. And we want our kids to stay in our homes. We want our kids to stay in our community, and they didn't want to go through a formalized process. And then, of course, there was a lot of risk and fear. We found out that to be a licensed child care provider, you have to go through a whole inspection process if you're doing it in your home. And the fire department will come, they'll do a fire inspection, and if a fire hazard is found, regardless of if you get licensed or pass or not, you have to fix it. So all of a sudden, you have an inspector coming into your home, and they could possibly find a change, which is very important to make this change for your safety. That could be $500, it could be $10,000, and now that community member has a $10,000 fire hazard that they have to pay, which, of course, I'm not sitting here trying to promote living in unsafe conditions. But thinking about the unintended consequences, there's so many unintended consequences, and thinking through this. And so we sat down with community, we paused, and we said, okay, let's reframe. Community, you lead and tell us what you need to be a healthy community and what this looks like with childcare. And they said, well, some of us want to be licensed, so we want to make sure we create a mechanism to be licensed. Some of us don't want to be licensed, or some of us want to work in licensed places, so we want to provide the flexibility and support for all of those options in our network. And we don't only want to focus on the people coming into our network, focused on making sure they're licensed, because that's either not accessible to them or that's not an interest of community members. So I think it's just, putting yourself in different, looking at different cultural opportunities, going to movies, reading books, meeting new friends, going into spaces where people are different from yourself, building relationships of trust, and always asking those most impacted what they feel they need. And a lot of times, and I think people are afraid to ask community because they'll give you an answer that you can't fix. Or they'll come, we'll do a healthcare screening, we'll do a screening for social determinants of health in the clinic, and then they'll say they have unstable housing, and then what are we going to do, and the doctor already has so much on their plate, and how are we going to start addressing these things in our 15 minutes together? That's where partnership comes into place. We are silly to think that we'd be able to address all these things by ourselves. So that's where you say, all right, I'm working in partnership and collaboration so that if we do get an answer from community that's not exactly what we can address, we can say, hey, that's a really good fit to talk to this organization, and let me connect you. So it's about listening and having the networks and the relationships so that we can move those solutions forward, even if it's not specifically and directly within what we're able to do. There was another person. Oh, no. Great. Oh, yes.
I really want to thank you for being here. I'm not young anymore, but you're still very inspiring to anybody's life. I have a nuts and bolts question.
Yeah.
The $15,000 mortgage grants that you give families.
$15,000.
15.
Yeah, for down payment assistance.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Does that come from taxes? Did you, as a mayor, get the city council to pass a law for a tax hike, or where does that money come from?
Yep, so a lot of cities have a housing and redevelopment authority and an economic development authority. And we had a housing and redevelopment authority, but not economic development authority. So we had been doing a lot of these studies. I asked the health department to do these housing studies. They did. We found a lot of inequities and a lot of barriers to safe, stable housing for our lowest income residents. And they were thinking for a couple years about increasing the tax levy to build an economic development authority. So that was done through an increased tax levy. And now we have this. But those funds were not, they were designated to supporting small businesses, but when we found this inequity, we were able to use some of the money to support housing stability, home ownership, and use that money to help reduce the racial inequity in home ownership in our city. But there's a lot of different funding mechanisms, and you just have to be super creative. And so we use that little bit of money and we leverage it to apply for federal grants, for other types of grants and other funding. We use matching dollars. So again, as folks working in health and healthcare and public health, we may not even have the resources community needs, or we may have limited resources, but that's where public health and public partnerships come into place. We need to think about all the partners that we work with to find those solutions, and piecemeal oftentimes solutions together to address those most pressing issues. So, thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it, and hopefully my talk wasn't too woo, but it's, I think, thinking about going above the micro and really looking at the macro and how our identities connect with the work we're doing is extremely important. So, thanks.